This is HOA anger. One icy step, and she tried to ruin my week. You are out of compliance, and I am done warning you. Karen Sanchez stood in my driveway at 6:45 in the morning, pointing at a thin line of slush near my mailbox, and told me she was fining me on the spot. I had cleared the walkway an hour earlier, but the plow truck had sprayed slush back across the edge when it came through, and she was calling that a violation. She had a plastic ruler in one hand and a clipboard in the other, and she was measuring the depth of slush like it was a crime scene. I work as a medical device sales rep, which means I spend half my life driving to hospitals and clinics, and the other half answering emails in parking lots. The last thing I needed that morning was a confrontation with the vice chair of the Plomark Park Reserve Association Design Review Board, but Karen was already talking about emergency winter compliance rules and how the fine started at $200. I told her the plow truck had just been through, and she said that was not her problem. She said the covenant required clear walkways at all times during snow events, and slush counted as not clear. She leaned in close and said, "You signed the covenants, now you live the covenants." Then she turned and walked back to her white SUV, which was parked in the middle of the street with the hazards on, blocking a lane. I watched her write something on the clipboard, and I knew this was not going to be the end of it. Karen had been on the board for 3 years, and everyone in the neighborhood knew she used the design review process to block approvals out of spite. If you pissed her off, your fence permit would sit in review for 6 months. If you challenged her, she would find a code violation on your house that had been there for a decade, and suddenly it was urgent. I had been trying to sell my house for 2 months, and the buyer was already nervous about the HOA. The last thing I needed was Karen threatening disclosures and liens, but that was exactly what she was doing. She called me that afternoon and said the slush violation was going on my account, and if I did not pay within 10 days, they would add late fees. She also said they had updated the snow removal policy in December, and now every property had to have a cleared path to the street within 2 hours of the end of a snow event, measured from the time the last flake fell. I asked her how I was supposed to know when the last flake fell, and she said that was not her problem either. The stakes were simple. If the HOA put a lien on my property, the sale would fall through, and I would be stuck in Plomark Park Reserve for another winter. I had a custody exchange every other Friday at 4 in the afternoon, and winter road conditions already made the drive tight. I could not afford delays, and I could not afford to lose this sale. So I started keeping records. I took photos of my walkway every morning before I left for work, and I saved every email Karen sent me. I also called my friend Marcus, who worked as a local journalist and had covered HOA disputes before. He told me to document everything, keep my tone calm in writing, and look for patterns. The next violation notice came 3 days later. Karen said my snow pile was encroaching on the common area, which was the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street. The snow pile was exactly where the plow truck had pushed it, same as every other house on the block, but she was targeting me. She sent a formal letter with a photograph attached, and she demanded I move the snow within 24 hours or face another fine. I moved the snow into my front yard, and she sent another notice saying snow piles could not block sight lines from the street. I asked her what sight lines, and she said the ones defined in the traffic safety addendum, which she refused to send me a copy of. Marcus told me that was a red flag. He said if the HOA was enforcing rules they would not share, that was grounds for a challenge. He also said I should file a public records request with the management company, because Florida HOAs have to disclose governing documents. I sent the request that night, and 2 days later, I got a response saying the documents were being compiled and I would have them within 10 business days. Karen called me the next morning and asked why I was wasting everyone's time with records requests. I told her I just wanted to see the rules she kept quoting, and she said, "I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink." I let her talk, because every word was helping me. Marcus had told me that threats like that were evidence of intent, and if I could prove a pattern of abuse, the management company would have to act. So I kept my tone calm, I repeated her words back to her to make sure I had them right, and I saved the call recording. Florida is a two-party consent state, but HOA business calls are considered official, and the management company policy allowed recordings for dispute resolution. Karen did not know I was recording, and she kept talking. The third notice came on a Friday, and this one was different. Karen claimed my temporary handrail brace on the front steps was an unapproved structure. I had installed a basic grab rail because the steps were icy, and I did not want my daughter slipping when she visited. It was a simple clamp-on rail, no drilling, no permanent modification, and it came off in 30 seconds. But Karen called it a structure, and she said the design review board had to approve any exterior addition before installation. She gave me 48 hours to remove it, or face a hearing. I called the management company and asked if a temporary safety rail required approval, and the woman on the phone sounded confused. She said she would check with the board, and she called me back an hour later to say Karen had escalated my file to the compliance committee. That meant a formal hearing, a written defense, and the possibility of fines up to $1,000 per violation. The woman also said the hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 7 in the evening, which was the same night I had custody exchange. I told her I could not make that time, and she said the board had already set the date and I could submit a written statement instead. That was when I knew this was deliberate. Karen was stacking the process to make sure I could not defend myself in person, and the management company was just going along with it. So I called Marcus again, and he said I needed to escalate. He told me to contact a local HOA attorney and get a consultation, because what Karen was doing sounded like harassment. The attorney I called, a guy named Ron Delgado, listened to my story for 10 minutes and then said, "This is textbook abuse of authority." He said the temporary rail did not require approval under Florida Building Code, and the HOA could not override state safety law. He also said the slush fine was questionable, because the covenant did not define slush or set a measurement standard. Ron told me to skip the hearing and send a written response citing the Florida statute, and he drafted the letter for me. It was 2 pages, calm and factual, and it ended with a request for the HOA to provide written justification for each fine. I sent it on Tuesday, and Wednesday morning Karen called me again. She was furious. She said I was trying to intimidate the board with legal threats, and she said my letter was going into my permanent file as evidence of non-cooperation. I asked her what non-cooperation meant, and she said it meant I was refusing to follow the process. I told her I was following the process by submitting a written defense, and she hung up on me. That same afternoon, my snowblower broke. The engine seized up halfway through clearing my driveway, and I had to finish the job with a shovel. It took me 2 hours, and by the time I was done, my back was screaming and I was late for a client meeting. I texted the client to reschedule, and then I got a call from Karen. She said a neighbor had reported that my driveway was not cleared within the 2-hour window, and she was adding another violation to my account. I told her the snowblower had broken and I had cleared it as fast as I could, and she said that was proof I refused to comply with the winter rules. I asked her how a broken snowblower was proof of refusal, and she said if I cared about compliance, I would have a backup plan. Then she said the board was considering a motion to authorize towing for repeat violators, and my name was at the top of the list. I asked her what that meant, and she said if I parked on the street during a snow event and my walkway was not cleared, they could tow my car. I told her that sounded illegal, and she said the covenant gave the HOA authority to remove obstacles during emergencies. Ron told me the towing threat was a bluff. He said the HOA would need a contracted vendor with specific authorization, and they would have to prove the car was creating a hazard. He also said I should file a complaint with the management company, because the board was not allowed to threaten homeowners without a vote. I filed the complaint that night, and I attached the call recording where Karen said my name was at the top of the towing list. The management company responded 2 days later with a form letter saying they were reviewing my concerns. If you are enjoying this chaos, hit that like button and subscribe, because HOA stories only get wilder from here. That weekend, we got another storm. 6 inches of snow fell overnight, and the plow trucks did not come through until noon. I cleared my driveway and walkway by 10 in the morning, and I took photos with timestamps. At 1 in the afternoon, Karen showed up at my door with a notice. She said my snow pile was blocking the storm drain, and I had to move it immediately. I walked outside and looked at the drain, which was 15 feet away from my snow pile and completely clear. I told her the drain was not blocked, and she said it was close enough to count. She also said the board had voted to authorize towing, and my car would be removed if I parked on the street overnight during snow conditions. I asked her to show me the authorization paperwork, and she said it was board business and I did not have a right to see it. I told her Florida law required HOAs to disclose enforcement actions, and she said I could file another records request if I wanted to waste more time. Then she walked back to her SUV, and I saw her take out her phone and start recording a video. She was narrating into the camera, describing my snow pile and my car and my walkway, and saying I was refusing to cooperate. I pulled out my phone and started recording her, and she turned and yelled at me to stop. I told her we were on my property and I had every right to record, and she said I was harassing her. That was the moment I realized this was not going to end with a hearing or a fine. Karen was building a case to justify a lien, and she was using every winter rule in the book to pile up violations. So I called Ron again, and he told me to stop engaging with her directly. He said every conversation was giving her more ammunition, and I should only communicate with the management company in writing. He also said I should get a copy of the board meeting minutes where they voted on the towing policy, because if the vote did not have a quorum, the policy was invalid. I filed another records request, and this time I asked for the minutes from every board meeting in the last 6 months. The management company pushed back and said that was too broad, so I narrowed it to the December and January meetings. They sent me the minutes 2 weeks later, and that was when I found the twist. The December meeting where they voted on the towing policy only had 3 board members present. The Plowmark Park Reserve bylaws required 4 members for a quorum, which meant the vote was invalid. Every enforcement action tied to that policy, including the towing threats Karen had made to me, was based on a rule that did not legally exist. I sent the minutes to Ron, and he laughed. He said this was the kind of mistake that could unravel the entire compliance campaign. He drafted a letter to the management company pointing out the quorum issue, and he CC'd the board president and the HOA attorney. The response came back in 3 days. The management company acknowledged the quorum error and said the towing policy was being suspended pending a revote. They also said they were conducting an internal review of recent enforcement actions, and they would be in touch. Karen did not take it well. She called me the next day and accused me of sabotaging the board. She said I was putting the entire neighborhood at risk by challenging safety policies, and she said the board was going to pursue the violations anyway, quorum or not. I told her that was not how it worked, and she said, "You signed the covenants, now you live the covenants." I reminded her that the covenants required valid votes, and she hung up again. 2 days later, I got a notice in the mail. It was not from Karen this time. It was from a towing company called Rapid Response Recovery, and it said my vehicle had been flagged for removal due to HOA non-compliance. The notice had a date and time, and it said the truck would arrive at 6 in the morning on Friday. I called Ron immediately, and he told me to ignore it. He said the towing company had no authority without a valid board vote, and if they showed up, I should call the police. He also said he was going to contact the management company and demand an explanation. Ron called me back an hour later and said the management company had no record of authorizing the tow notice. He said it looked like Karen had contacted the towing company directly and given them my information, which meant she was acting outside the board's authority. He told me to document everything and be ready to file a police report if the truck showed up. I spent Thursday night parked in my driveway instead of on the street, and I set an alarm for 5:30 in the morning. The truck showed up at 6:15. I was standing in my driveway with my phone recording when the flatbed pulled up and stopped in front of my house. The driver got out and looked at the notice on his clipboard, and I walked over and asked him who authorized the tow. He said the HOA had called it in, and I told him the HOA had no valid authorization. He said he was just following orders, and I told him if he hooked my car, I would call the police and report it as theft. He looked uncomfortable, and he called his dispatcher. After a 2-minute conversation, he got back in the truck and drove away. I called Ron and told him what happened, and he said we had grounds for a formal complaint. He filed a written complaint with the management company, and he sent a copy to the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, which oversees HOA disputes. The complaint cited Karen by name, listed every unauthorized action she had taken, and demanded an immediate investigation. The management company responded within 24 hours. They said they were suspending all enforcement actions on my account pending the review, and they said Karen was being placed on administrative leave from her board role. That should have been the end of it, but Karen was not done. The following Sunday, we got another snowstorm. This one was bigger, 10 inches overnight, and the plows did not start clearing until late morning. I was outside at 8 shoveling my walkway when Karen pulled up in her SUV. She got out holding a bag of rock salt, and she walked up to my driveway and said the board required me to salt my walkway within 1 hour of clearing. I told her there was no such rule, and she said it was part of the emergency winter addendum. I asked her to show me the addendum, and she ripped open the salt bag and dumped it across my driveway. Salt went everywhere. It hit the snow, it hit my car, it hit me, and it sprayed across the street into the neighbor's yard. Karen was screaming that I was putting people at risk, and I was recording the whole thing. A Hillsborough County Sheriff's deputy happened to be driving by, and he pulled over when he saw the scene. He got out and asked what was going on, and Karen immediately started talking. She said I was refusing to follow HOA safety rules, and she said she was trying to protect the neighborhood. The deputy asked her if she had authorization to dump salt on my property, and she said the HOA gave her authority. The deputy asked her to show him the authorization, and she could not. He told her she needed to leave, and he said if she came back onto my property without permission, he would cite her for trespassing. Karen argued with him for another minute, then got in her SUV and drove off. The deputy gave me his card and told me to call if she showed up again, and he said I should file a report with the management company. I thanked him, and I sent the video to Ron that afternoon. Ron said the salt incident was the breaking point. He told me the management company was now legally obligated to take action because Karen had created a liability issue. If she was dumping salt on private property without authorization, the HOA could be sued, and the management company would be named in the lawsuit. He said the board would have to vote on her removal, or the management company would terminate their contract with the association. 2 days later, I got an email from the management company. It said the board had voted to remove Karen from the design review committee, and she was being placed on a no-contact directive, which meant she was not allowed to communicate with me directly about HOA business. The email also said the management company was conducting an independent audit of enforcement actions from the last 6 months, and they were reviewing all fines and notices issued during that time. They said if any improper charges were found, refunds would be issued automatically. I forwarded the email to Marcus, and he said this was exactly the kind of outcome that made HOA abuse stories worth covering. He asked if he could write an article about it, and I told him to wait until the audit was done. The audit results came back in March. The management company found that Karen had issued over 60 improper notices across the neighborhood during the winter, most of them tied to the invalid towing policy or the fake emergency addendum she kept quoting. The audit also found that she had been adding late fees to accounts without board approval, and the fees had generated over $12,000 in revenue that went straight into the HOA's operating fund. The management company issued a full report to the board, and they recommended refunds for everyone affected. The board voted to approve the refunds, and they also voted to terminate the vendor relationship Karen had set up with Rapid Response Recovery, the towing company that had shown up at my house. It turned out Karen had negotiated a deal where the HOA paid a monthly retainer to keep the company on call, and she was getting a commission for every vehicle towed. The whole thing was a scam, and the audit exposed it. The management company canceled the contract, and they reported Karen to the state for financial misconduct. My refund check arrived in April. It covered every fine Karen had issued, plus the late fees, plus a $200 credit for my trouble. The letter that came with the check said the HOA was implementing new oversight policies to prevent future abuse, and they were requiring board members to complete ethics training before taking any enforcement action. The letter also said Karen was no longer affiliated with the Plomark Park Reserve Association in any capacity, and all future enforcement would go through the management company. I closed on the house sale in May. The buyer was relieved to hear the HOA drama was over, and the lien threat never materialized. I moved out 2 weeks later, and I never saw Karen again. But I heard from Marcus that she tried to run for the board again the following year, and the homeowners voted her down by a landslide. He said the neighborhood group chat was still talking about the audit, and people were using it as a reference whenever the board tried to push a questionable rule. The custody exchange time that had been hanging over me all winter stopped being an issue once I moved closer to my ex's place. The drives got shorter, the stress dropped, and I could actually focus on my job again instead of fighting HOA battles. I still keep the recordings and the audit report in a folder on my phone, just in case I ever need to explain what happened. Every time I talk to someone buying a house in an HOA, I tell them the same thing Marcus told me at the start. Document everything. Keep your tone calm in writing, and look for patterns. The funny thing is, Karen probably would have gotten away with it if she had just left me alone. But she kept escalating, kept threatening, kept pushing until she crossed the line with the salt bag and the unauthorized tow notice. And every time she said, "I will bury you in notices until you run out of printer ink," she was actually burying herself. Because I kept every notice, every email, every recording, and when the management company finally looked at the full picture, the pattern was impossible to ignore. A management audit that exposes the pattern is exactly what took her down, and the HOA had no choice but to cut ties. The payback was not just the refund, it was watching the whole system correct itself because one person decided to fight back with paperwork instead of giving in. The neighborhood got their money back, the towing scam got shut down, and Karen got exactly what she earned: a no-contact directive from management and a ruined reputation. The board votes that happened without a quorum meant the entire enforcement wave was invalid, and once that came out, the dominoes fell fast. I sold the house, I got my daughter to her mom on time every week, and I never had to deal with another snow violation again. The management company implemented a policy where any board member who issues more than 10 notices in a month gets flagged for review, and they have to submit written justification for each one. It is not a perfect system, but it is better than what Karen was running. And every time I drive past a neighborhood with an HOA sign, I remember the plastic ruler, the clipboard, the salt bag explosion, and the tow truck that never hooked my car. The trump card I was holding the whole time was simple. I had a public records response showing prior complaints against Karen for the same behavior, and I knew she had pulled the same scam on 3 other homeowners the year before. I did not play that card until I was sitting in the management company office during the audit interview, and when I dropped it, I kept it to 2 sentences. I said, "Karen Sanchez has a history of targeting homeowners with invalid enforcement actions, and here is the proof." Then I let the silence do the damage. The management company rep looked at the complaint file, looked at me, and said they would be in touch. 2 weeks later, Karen was gone. The stakes were real, the fight was exhausting, and the winner was brutal. But in the end, the paper trail won, the neighborhood got justice, and I got out clean. If you ever end up in a fight with an HOA, remember this. Stay calm, keep records, and never stop documenting. Because the moment they cross the line, you will have everything you need to prove it. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.